Well, here we go. Happy Markcast Monday here following the disappointing, needless to say, CFL Week 11. I will say, had the Mariners not swept the Astros at home, the Mariners swept the Astros. I'm about Skip Bayless here. I was late getting on. I was about Skip Bayless here. I got my trash can. I got my BC Lions hat. So we're getting close here. Not quite because the Mariners, thank God, Jose Altuve being thrown out. This was how great my weekend was before last night. Jose Altuve, biggest heel in baseball right now, hits his 2000th career hit, goes for two. Cade Marlowe, our rookie, throws him out at second. That's where I was at. And then this whole weekend fell apart. Jason, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Reid. Obviously, I went to two of the games this weekend, so it was a great weekend from that perspective, but just wish one of my teams won.
You're getting to the point. Yeah, we're running out of options here. Evan's back at school at LSU. Evan, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Been a busy weekend for me, but it was an exciting slate of games, and I think we have a lot to talk about, not just with the actual games themselves, but I think with some of the circumstances around them. There was a lot of interesting CFL news this week to cover, so excited to get into that as usual.
Yeah, we had Jason and I were with Naylor. Evan was driving back cross country, getting back to school, so didn't have Evan on the Thursday show. I would just say, in all seriousness, because Farhan, was doing his post game, and Vernon talking about because Vernon took full credit for the loss and all of that. But I said, when BC is sitting here in November with a 31-13 loss at IG Field in like the West Finals, this is the game like I want you to circle and look back on. Like, these are winnable games that you need to go in, you need to take care of business. Where are the donut boys? We have Jake Delagalla running around the field. I mean, looking like Patrick Mahomes out there. I mean, this is crazy. I just didn't understand. I watched the second half. We were going to my mom's for dinner, and then I'm like, I got to pull this game up. I got to see what the heck's going on. So disappointing. I don't know why our kryptonite playing away from BC Place or whatever. Jason, what did you make? I know you were getting on the train back from Ottawa. What did you make of to me, it felt like a really big collapse last night at the BC.
Yeah, I mean, like, we've seen a regression in recent weeks from that BC defense, which is certainly concerning. Obviously, the game a couple weeks ago against Winnipeg, and then this week against Saskatchewan, very disappointing to see that. But I think that they had some untimely turnovers that gave Saskatchewan short fields, and that was a big factor in how they were able to, convert those into touchdowns and ultimately get enough points to beat BC. I think if these teams played 10 times, I think BC wins probably 9 times, but I think we saw that one time just the last night.
And I don't know. I mean, like I listen to the post game and I hear Rick and he's in the, hey, I know you guys want to beat yourselves up right now. Don't worry about it. It's like, I would worry about it. Like, this is a pattern now. This is a pattern not being able to perform on the road. Like, Vernon, I don't blame all of that. And he got beat up again. You need to be able to protect them. Yeah, James says here, VA took some hard, dirty hits. Evan, what did you make of this? Because we're on the VA, train.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an interesting game, and I think this game to me was honestly more surprising than the Edmonton win, and we'll obviously get into that later. But there was a lot of people predicting that Edmonton was going to win that game against Hamilton. Didn't see a lot of people that were saying, Saskatchewan was going to beat BC, and that's kind of what I'm getting at here. Definitely an upset game, but I think BC, personally, I mean, Saskatchewan played very well, and Jake Delagalla, I was very high on him. I think, his performances have definitely swayed a little bit. They haven't exactly been consistent, but this was clearly the best outing that he's had in a long time. And, just to see that, I mean, BC played well in this game. I find it interesting how every time BC loses, like I go back to that Toronto game, it's not because Vernon Adams, doesn't play well, or in that case, he had a lot of turnovers. But like in this game, or both of those games, really, the one against Toronto and then the one against Saskatchewan here, because he didn't play in the Winnipeg game. He was injured. Both times he's throwing for like 400 yards, 3 touchdowns. Like he's still, putting the work in. And when I looked at the stats initially, because I didn't get a chance to watch much of this game, I did watch most of the others, but this game in particular, just looking at the stats, I thought, how did BC lose? I'm looking at this. I'm like, Vernon, 400 plus yards, 3 touchdowns. Like, he was doing his thing. Now, I noticed that they didn't have much of a run game, which, again, is always a red flag. But, yeah, then I looked over at Saskatchewan, and I saw Jake Delagalla was dealing, and Jamal Morrow looked decent on the ground, and they finally started spreading things out. And I think what's really important here from the Rough Riders perspective, because I think we know about BC already. We know what they're capable of. Yes, they've had some struggles on the road, but we still believe in them. I still believe that they will be in that West final again against Winnipeg. I'll say that every week until it actually happens, or maybe it won't. Who knows? But I'm pretty confident that it will. What's most important for Saskatchewan here is now they're back at 500. They're 5-5, and most importantly, because Winnipeg sneaked by Calgary, Calgary is now 2 games behind. So we've been talking about this, kind of race in the West between Calgary and Saskatchewan. Those 2 spots. Now Saskatchewan is finally pulling away a bit. They have they're 2 games ahead or whatever. They have that advantage, and I think that's going to go a long way. And personally, I liked what I saw from Dolegala. I think him, we'll see what happens with Mason Fine, obviously, but I wouldn't have a problem rolling with Jake Dolegala at this point. He proved himself, took down the top team really in the West, in my opinion, even though Winnipeg is officially ahead in the standings. And if you're a Saskatchewan fan right now, I think you should just be happy that you're back at 500 with all the turmoil that's happened this season.
I think Jason had messaged the group last night after I was having my panic attack. Hamilton coming in next week. Is that a make good? Is that a make good for BC? I don't know. I've lost faith in them. In terms of just, I don't know if it's a locker room thing. They talk Ryan Phillips tonight. I shot Ryan's wedding. Like, I know Ryan very well. Like, he's got the guys up. I just don't know what it is. If it's just a little bit more relaxed locker room, and we got Rick kind of like, well, whatever, guys. Like, we got to do. They need to show up. And Winnipeg, I just feel like when they show up, they carry themselves like a championship quality caliber team. And just in terms of these are the games. Yeah, you had the fluke game, and even when Edmonton was up 22-0. They didn't worry. They came down the field. Look what happened when BC, they started throwing those picks against Toronto. Oh my God, Dane, we're freaking out. We gotta do all this and do all that. Dane fell behind. We gotta throw all these. We gotta make it down the field. Kind of making things worse. I just feel like there's something going on in that mentality right now in terms of that team. I don't know, Jason, do you have thoughts on that? Just it feels like something's not clicking here.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point a few minutes ago about how they're struggling on the road. I think that because that game next week's in BC, I think I am fully expecting a big bounce back, because as little faith as you have in BC right now, I can assure you that I have less faith in the Hamilton Tiger Cats at this point. So I think that BC will get a big win there. But I think, like you said, when you go back at the end of this season, and Winnipeg's ahead in the standings, this will be the game or one of the games that you circle and say that this is why BC is not hosting the West Final. And I think they really do need to host that West Final against Winnipeg. It's going to be very hard for them to go to Winnipeg in November and win, as we saw last year.
That's what I was gonna say. I've seen this movie. I went to the semis where we beat the pants off Calgary. It wasn't even a game, and then we go. I've seen this whole movie before. I lived through this, and I said I'm not going to go to Winnipeg. Because last year I was thinking God, do I go? And I thought to my head, I'm not going to go just to watch BC lose. And they kept it close, and Nathan played his heart out. But he was coming back. It was never quite right. We had a couple questions here. Luis says, good to see you, Evan. Congratulations on your new IFL director role there. I need to start calling you the director more on here. I know that was said. I was going to do that. Luis had a question for Jason. And we'll get to the Ticats, but in terms of turning Edmonton around, are you feeling better on their stock right now?
I definitely do. Obviously, it's a lot easier to feel more confident about them coming off their first win of the season. But I think the key will be breaking that home losing streak next week against Ottawa, which is as good of an opportunity as they've had to break that streak. If they can win that game, get their second win of the season, I think they have a back-to-back against Calgary the next couple weeks after that. So I think that those are winnable games as well for them. So they could go on a little bit of a winning streak here. I think they can get right back into it.
And then, Evan, do you think does this turn Saskatchewan around? Are you looking differently at them? Because people are saying in the comments, we're not giving the Riders enough credit here. We're kind of blaming BC.
We'll see. Right now, they're definitely a wild card team. They have a lot of questions themselves, even at 500, kind of getting back into the playoff race. I don't know. I need a couple more games of this type of performance from them before I'm really confident. Maybe give it another couple weeks. And I feel like I say that a lot, just give it a couple more weeks. But it's true. Like this team, has had a lot of inconsistency, and I've pointed out a lot of flaws about them. I still think they're a good football team. They have a lot of good pieces there, and I find it a bit interesting that they have jumped Calgary this much. Again, I was pretty high on Calgary, and now that's starting to slip on a bit of a weekly basis. But no, I mean, look, I think Saskatchewan, right now they're kind of, they're reaching one of those peaks again, and I hope that they can ride on that for a bit, just because we're kind of at a pivotal point in the season. Like, they can hold this for now, but there's still enough time left to where other teams can, come in and take that at the very end of the season.
I thought it was funny here. I had this tweet pulled up. Michael Ball he was under the weather yesterday. So the Riders were battling through adversity on all fronts here. Even Michael Ball, the voice of the Rough Riders, battling through. But yeah, back to 500. He had tweeted out before the game, like, I think the Riders take this, and obviously whatever. I said, I'll take BC by 2 touchdowns. Like, I didn't even think it was going to be close. Remarkable, just kind of. Like you said, this is why I don't do sports betting, is because I would even throw my head through a window even faster than that. To Dorothy's credit, I did tell her last night, I said, man, BC just kind of crapped the bed here against the Riders. She goes, oh, are those the green people? So Dorothy knows. Dorothy's keeping track. Dorothy knows the Riders. I want to get into the game itself. Jason, I know you were seeing the first part coming back on the train. What did you make of just the performance here? And I got a couple notes to pull up.
Well, I think one of the biggest surprises for me was how Saskatchewan's defensive line really pushed around BC's offensive line in this one. They really, really struggled in this one. I think that on top of that, they had several penalties. Kent Perkins, don't mean to call anybody out, but he had 3 huge penalties in this one, especially in the second half. The last one, I think when they were driving to complete that comeback, I think they would have completed that comeback and taken the lead on that second to last drive, I think it was, if they didn't take a key holding penalty that would have set them up on a 3rd and 1 if they didn't take that penalty. So, I mean, that was very disappointing. I think that's really what stood out for me in this game. And like you said before, I think BC's defense really getting chewed up by an inexperienced quarterback in Jake Dolegala.
Yeah, I have here, and I don't want to I was going to note this off the top of the show, and then we just had such a, rants here going into it. But we got copyright stricken from the Shield last week from the NFL for talking about one of Farhan's quote tweets about Nathan Works. I hope the CFL doesn't come after us as well. I thought we had fair use to commentary over a quote tweet of a game clip. So hopefully we're fine with that. Evan, were you surprised? Because Delegate, I mean, we've seen him play. People have, wanted to see him behind Mason, him finally come out here. Were you impressed with how he was performing?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I was surprised at how quickly he caught on. I've always been somewhat of a Jake Dolegala believer, but he hadn't quite sold me yet. Again, he has shown flashes, but it has been very hard, I think, for him to be consistent so far. And part of that is just because he's not getting a lot of playing time. He's even behind, I think, Mason Fine in that regard. So, yeah, I mean, Dolegala, I think he still has some, things to improve. I mean, he was with I think the Bengals, I want to say maybe it's been 2 years now, 2021. So I think he's going on year 2 in the CFL. Don't quote me on that. I should have probably looked at that. But no, all I can say about Jake Dolegala for now is I do believe that he can, start for the rest of the season, to be honest, if he needs to. I think there's a lot of potential there, and the more he plays, I think the more he'll be able to fit into this league. So that's where I'm at with that.
And of course, Evan's spot on as always. I pulled it up, but of course, Evan knows exactly what's going on with all of these guys. Remarkable. Yeah, I had comments, Farhan talking. Fortunate, even to be down 11 at half, it just felt like, and we're watching this kind of the game-winning drive at the end, and Lucky had the big drop, and what was it? Deep shot to Lucky. I like where he had one drop, but he had the thing too where he kind of did the Tyreek Hill with the peace sign run, and then I thought that was kind of funny. The other thing at the end when the final play where they kneeled it and then tried to do kind of a semi Hail Mary. I don't know. Like, do you let your special teams go there, Jason? I thought that was odd at the end of the game where we're like, we're taking the ball all the way. I have no faith that Vernon's throwing the ball 80 yards here.
Well, unfortunately, I actually missed the last 2 minutes of the game. That was right when my train was arriving in Hamilton, so I missed just the end of it. But I was watching with my data on the train, watching the huge comeback here. But excuse me, unfortunately missed the final couple minutes there.
Andy had a comment in our chat, Evan. Reid might disagree with me, but that was one of VA's best games ever. Gritty and took it like a champ until the end. What did you make of VA?
Yeah, VA. I mean, again, even in a loss, VA I think is still impressive. And he, maybe he's asked to do too much. Maybe that's the reason why they're in this position. I mean, 455 yards. That's a lot to be throwing. Even in a CFL game. And you look at, you look at the run game, it was non-existent. Vernon was the leading rusher, 2 carries for 24 yards. So, that I think plays a role. But, still continuing week after week to just find his receivers, I think is the most, impressive thing. And Alex Hollins has really stood out in the past couple weeks. He was exceeding when I was there. I guess that was last weekend in Calgary. And then Lucky Whitehead finally getting involved a bit. Lucky, I think, is a fan favorite there in BC. Every time I've gone to one of those games, people really gravitate towards Lucky Whitehead. So it's nice to see him get worked into that offense because, to be honest, we hadn't called his name out that much this year because there's so many other guys that are playmakers. Keon Hatcher, too. He had a career game last week against Calgary there at BC Place. So, again, even in a loss, I never, Vernon is really, he's really exceeding. He's really exceeding. I think he's exceeded everybody's expectations, and he continues to do that even when there is doubt casted upon the team. And that's why I am still confident in this team's ability. Now, given their struggles on the road, and this kind of pertains to, this is going away from this specific game for a minute, but I think just in general, it might be a bigger deal now if BC hosts the West Final as compared to them going to Winnipeg. Because I've been saying this, they're going to be in the West Final. They're going to be in the West Final. But now with their struggles on the road that have been pointed out, and it seems to be more of a consistent trend now than I believed before, I'm looking at that now okay, well, maybe if it's at home, they're going to have a much higher chance of winning than if it's in Winnipeg. And home field advantage, you could say that about every team. But I don't know. Maybe this is something we're discovering about BC that we didn't really know before. I'm not going to say that they can only win at home. I don't think they're one of those teams. It's interesting because in CFL it's almost backwards. There's so many teams that can win away, but then when they go try and win at home, it doesn't work out. You looked at Ottawa and they finally broke the streak, and then Edmonton, obviously hasn't broken theirs yet, but they finally did win a game. Thank God for that. We'll get into that later. But no, ultimately I think BC, with Vernon at quarterback, there's no doubt to be had there, and there's really, I've only seen him make. There's been very few mistakes I've seen him make this year. And it's safe to call him a top quarterback of the league, even in a loss.
Yeah, it's frustrating when you look at the stat line, like you said here, throwing for 455 yards. And how is Mizell 7 carries for 15? Saskatchewan shutting that down. It's crazy to me here that we couldn't figure this out. I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss. Jason, anything else on this one? I don't want to keep hammering down the Lions, but obviously this was kind of the most recent game.
Yeah, I wanted to give a little more credit to the Rough Riders. Specifically, their wide receivers stepped up and made some huge catches in this one. Samuel Emelis continues his breakout season after being a first-round pick last year. Jareth Stearns, I think it is. I always mess up that first name, but he had a big game in this one as well. Keon Schaefer-Baker back in the lineup as well. So I thought the receivers played a huge role in this one for Saskatchewan, and a big reason why they were able to come out victorious.
Picton had that big catch there at the end to get the first down as well, and that went to review and everything. And I was sitting there, I got my phone out, and I was sitting there trying to kind of look and see the wide. I was like, "Is that a catch?" It was good. I give him credit. I just, like I said, I've seen this movie before. Where's my standings here? Is it Saskatchewan this year versus as opposed to Calgary coming into BC, and then I don't know. It's like rinse and repeat. I would just like to see BC kind of maintained a little bit of this momentum than have such kind of a roller coaster here. Let's get to the next game. I'll get it pulled up here. Jason was at this one. We had the scouting reports from 2 different games this weekend. The Montreal at Ottawa Red Blacks. This finish of the season, Jason. What's going on here? Thrilling fashion at the end of the game.
Yeah, so first of all, this was my first time at the Ottawa Red Black Stadium, TD Place, and I thought that it was an excellent stadium experience, first of all. But I think that the biggest takeaway I have from this game, despite the dramatic comeback, I think the best team won this game because when you look at the first half and how Ottawa was able to build that lead, they came as a result of a couple of big turnovers from Caleb Evans, the Montreal Alouettes quarterback, and it set up Ottawa with very short fields, and they were able to capitalize that and turn them into touchdowns. But overall, Ottawa's offense didn't get much going in this game, and Montreal was able to catch up to them in the second half when they stopped making those mistakes. So I thought that was really impressive from Caleb Evans, and the fact that he was able to grow up before our eyes in that second half after having a brutal first half, like I said. So I think that it was pretty sweet for him to get the win over his former team, a team that probably could have given him the shot to be their first full-time starting quarterback, but ultimately they threw him to the curb, and he came back to bite him in this one.
Yeah, because he was certainly involved earlier. So what's the deal with Cody? Is it still a thumb issue? Is it still kind of week to week?
Yeah, I think that he was dressing for this game as the third quarterback. I think that's become a trend in the CFL where, like, if they're somewhat close to returning, they often dress as the third quarterback. I think it has something to do with like the 1 game injured list kind of thing, and maybe from a cap perspective, but I'm not too sure. But yeah, I think he's pretty close to returning because he was dressing in this one, but ultimately didn't see any action.
Because spoiler alert, I've been trying to get friend of the show back on the show for a while here, Cody Fajardo, and there's been a lot of like, well, he hasn't played or he was hurt, and it's a short week, and we're out traveling this week. Like, we've been working on it, been trying to get Cody back on, but we gotta get the stars aligned there with Montreal. So working on that. Evan, what did you make? Caleb Evans coming out being the hero ball here, 333 yards, two TDs with 2 interceptions.
Yes, very exciting game, and one of my major takeaways from this one was, Caleb Evans. He could stick around, I think, in this league for a long time. Definitely as a backup and perhaps as a fill-in starter when need be. Look at a guy like maybe Matt Schultz, who's kind of bounced around now between Montreal and then Hamilton. I kind of see Caleb Evans in that role, like where you might not be a permanent starter, but you can stick around a long time in this league if you just kind of find your role and your niche and you're in the right place at the right time. Caleb Evans is a playmaker, and I've watched this guy, before. I think he played in Ottawa at one point, so this will count as a revenge game.
Yeah.
So I've watched him a couple times before, watched tape, things like that. This guy really, the fact, dare I say that, he could start over Cody Fajardo, and I shouldn't say that if Reid's going to bring him back on the show, but, again, like, he got the job done, and maybe it wasn't in beautiful fashion. It took, again, a rough first half, and then he kind of had to make that up in the second half and, late game heroics and all that. So maybe it wasn't exactly perfect. It wasn't like a Jake Dolegala type performance that we saw in Saskatchewan, but there was a lot there. There was a lot there to work with, and there's no doubt that he elevated this offense and, gave them a win that I don't know if they needed it. I mean, yeah, like, look, it's good to always win. Your goal is to win. It's football. It's sports. But, like if you look at the standings, I mean, Montreal's pretty comfortable right now. Like they kind of have a bit of breathing room. So if they lost this game, I mean, considering Ottawa's at the bottom of the division, it wouldn't matter too much. But either way, they still made a statement. And outside of Caleb Evans for Montreal in this game, Austin Mack continues to impress week after week. I'm pretty sure he's locked in his spot as an all-star at this point. Tyler Snead, he kind of came back. He had that huge game against Toronto and then kind of went quiet. Seems like on his best days, he's really good at scoring, multiple touchdowns in this game on the receiving end. And then the other one I wanted to point out, a player that I haven't really talked about this year was Hergy Mayala had a big play in this game. Hergy, he was in the CFL and then tried his luck with the Breakers in the USFL. He went down there with Richie Sandani, who's now on the Ticats, and didn't work out for them down there, so they came back up to the CFL. And it's been a pretty quiet year for Hergy, from my understanding, and for Richie too in Hamilton. Kind of both quiet years for guys that are coming back from a USFL attempt. But it was nice to see him have his moment in this game. And then, just switching over to the Ottawa side here for a minute. I honestly don't have a ton of notes on Ottawa. Like Jason said, they, at the end of the day, even if it took a big comeback in the second half, the better team still won. This wasn't, you could consider it a choke job by Ottawa, but given the way that they built the lead, you'll see this a lot where teams, they will build a lead, off unconventional ways. So outside of, big offensive drives and things like that, things that aren't sustainable. And then people are surprised when a team comes back, because it's a lot easier to come back when you've just made a few simple mistakes, in my opinion, than when the opponent is, again, putting together these, long, stingy drives and the defense won't let up. So yeah, overall, I mean, this was a very, again, thrilling game. Montreal, I think, had 15 points in the fourth quarter. And yeah, I mean, but at the end of the day, like, I wasn't surprised that Montreal was able to come back and win this. I mean, it wasn't a guarantee, but, when it happened, I was like, well, that's good, because Montreal, I think, deserved to win, is what I'm getting at. And the ultimate point here that I'll wrap up with is, Ottawa's been losing a lot of momentum. I mean, we talked about them a couple weeks ago, having all this, pull, and it was like, crumb sanity or whatever you want to call it. But now that's kind of all gone away, and they're kind of back to this, place again where you lost those games to Hamilton. You're at the bottom of the East. Like, things really don't look that great. And we'll get into Hamilton later, because I have my own thoughts about them and their position. And personally, I think they're worse off. But I'll get to why I think that. But just looking at Ottawa, I mean, I don't know. I think, yeah, I mean, I believe in them, and I like Bob Dice for the most part. You can question, some of the things that he's done in recent weeks from the coaching perspective. But I like Bob Dice, I like the culture they have there. I just think, they still need another year. As sad as that is, like, I don't know, even with all the stuff that's happened and, the big roller coaster, all the ups and downs, like, they could still win a couple more games, but I definitely don't see them as a playoff team. And they're getting further away from that each week at this point.
Yeah, Ottawa feels very cold right now, and I want to get Jason's thoughts comparing them to the Ticats. I will just say on Caleb Evans, to give him a little credit, I remember when I had Tim Capper with the Flight Decks podcast on, when I think we were doing the AFL stuff or whatever, and I said, well, how are you feeling about Cody and everything? And he said, I feel great about all of our quarterbacks. He said, I feel good, even if Cody's not, Caleb's good, and I can't remember their third string guy, but Tim said, no, I think we're in a solid position right now. And I don't know, it just feels like they're really kind of putting together a cohesive team here. I like, Stanback's always solid, didn't have a huge game, but always good. And then we've talked before, like I said, about kind of the receiving core and the Austin Max of everything of the world. Jason, in terms of like, it does feel like Ottawa has lost all of the momentum it had.
Yeah, it does, but I mean, it's really it all comes down to the playoff race right now, because none of the teams in the playoff race are really pulling ahead. I guess it's with Saskatchewan pulling ahead a 2-game lead here. It really comes down to the Ticats, Red Blacks, and Stampeders for that last playoff spot right now in the CFL as of right now. And I think that the Red Blacks, I mean, a lot of people will compare them to the Ticats, but I think they're actually more comparable this season to the Stampeders, because they've been in a lot of close games where they've had opportunities to win games, whereas the Ticats have, like, they've been blown out when they've lost. They haven't won, like, they haven't been able to be competitive a lot in games. And I think that Calgary and the Red Blacks have really down the stretch, they haven't been able to, close games out. So I think at the end of the day, I think it's going to come down to those 3 teams, and one of those teams is going to grab that last playoff spot somehow. And I think, maybe 6 wins gets it done this year in the CFL. That would be, probably one of the worst teams ever to make the playoffs in the CFL.
I would say circle here, maybe 6:45 p.m. Pacific here on Sunday night next week. If Ottawa loses to Edmonton at home, I do think their season is about over, except for the fact that you got Hamilton and BC. So assuming, and we don't know, assuming BC does its job here at home and takes care of business, that's going to be rough. But I see that. We'll get to Edmonton, but Jason, and I'll get Evan as well. Are you pretty high on maybe Ottawa finally giving up the loss here at home?
I mean, I think it's as good of a chance as any, as I said earlier in the show, for Edmonton to break that streak. But until I see it, I just won't believe it. I think that I've seen too many close calls with this team, with so many opportunities to win that game at home and break that streak, that I just don't have like full confidence in their ability to do that. And Ottawa last year went in there and won with Nick Arbuckle at quarterback. So, I mean, I thought last year that was the game that Edmonton was going to win, and they still didn't do it. So I'll believe it when I see it.
We'll be talking here in 2 years. I remember that time when I thought Ottawa was going to come in and lose against them. They're going to keep going. Evan, any other thoughts on this?
I mean, in regards to the Ottawa-Edmonton game, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure if Ottawa has descended that deeply yet. Again, just like Jason, I'll believe it when I see it. I think about all the times, like most recently it was the Winnipeg game, where Edmonton, pulled away like 22-0 and lost that. And there was a couple, games where they had momentum like early in the season when they could have just broken the streak and then, gotten more fans in the building as the season continued when there was still hope. Now you're already looking forward to next year. And I know you and Jason already talked about the Victor Cui stuff on the show with Naylor on Thursday. Speaking of Naylor, by the way, he put out a tweet that I thought was very interesting. And it goes back to Jason's point about just sort of the Red Blacks. Like, they're 3-7, but they're one of those teams where, you're a handful of plays away from being like 5-5. And that really goes a long way, I think, because Jason's right. Like I put Ottawa and Hamilton together because they're in the same division, but the way they have won and lost games is extremely different, compared to some of the other ways that we've seen. Or again, if you want to draw the comparison to Calgary, yes, Calgary and Ottawa are much closer because they've just had so many lost opportunities, where with Hamilton, I think it's a pretty clear line. It's either they win or they lose. Like when they win, it's by a good margin most of the time. It feels like a confident win. And when they lose, it's not pretty. With these teams, with Calgary and then Ottawa in particular, and I feel like Ottawa will feel the burn maybe even more, just because, Hamilton is further behind than Saskatchewan is when we're talking about East-West playoff stuff. I think Ottawa might feel the burn there because if they, let's say Hamilton gets into the playoffs at 6-12, and maybe Ottawa has the same record or they're a game behind, but Hamilton holds the tiebreaker because they won those games against Ottawa already. If that happens, you had an opportunity to go to the playoffs with that record, but you still couldn't get in. And that's when you're sitting there, the whole front office coaching staff is sitting there just kicking themselves. Like, we were that close, even in a year where it didn't feel close. Generally, there was still an opportunity that we couldn't grasp. So it's a unique situation across the league for sure. I think the East Division, just because, I don't know. The West to me is more ironed out than the East. I don't know. Like Toronto and Montreal are pretty much locks at this point. We're really just looking at, Hamilton and Ottawa, which is still a toss-up. And Calgary and Saskatchewan is becoming, a further battle than it was a couple weeks ago. So I don't know. It's an interesting time. I think the bottom line here is, yes, we're going to have a team in the playoffs that does not look like a playoff team. And, that's happened in the NFL. We had the 8-9 Buccaneers, playing the Cowboys in the playoffs, in Tom Brady's last year, just this past season. It doesn't feel like that long ago. So I don't know. People, you're going to get those people saying, well, this is why the CFL is bad. And, this is why we can't, bother with alternative football. I'm like, well, it's a problem across the sport. And, even in college football, there's a lot of mismatches and things like that. So that opens up a broader discussion. I'm not going to get into that, but you see where I'm going with this.
Yeah, speaking of the Cowboys, Seahawks, it was preseason, but I was there. Seahawks took care of business against the Cowboys here. I was very excited for that. Jason, you have any other notes on this one before we get to that? A little bit of a snooze fest here with Winnipeg, Calgary, but anything else on Ottawa and all that?
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Montreal's defense, which is a unit we haven't been talking enough about this season. I think they're just a really, really solid defense and one of the best units in the league. And I think that in the second half, they really put the clamps down, didn't allow Ottawa to get anything going, and allowed that to be a catalyst for the big comeback.
Yeah, I like Montreal. Montreal's my team of the East. Certainly can't cheer for the Argos. Mike Mitchell's got that on lockdown. So we'll hope Montreal will be good. Coming up here, this was the Friday night one. Winnipeg at Calgary gave them a run for their money. Calgary came back. Drew Brown a little bit more down to earth here. I have a quote here from Michael Ball, I think, coming up. But Evan, initial thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so Drew Brown, I didn't predict this, but I certainly said it could happen last week. Drew Brown kind of came out hot, in that comeback against Edmonton after Claros went down, looked great. Again, is in his third year, that big third year in the CFL, was getting experience, getting these game reps. But he can always come back down to earth, as you've just said. That was literally what I had in my notes, that exact term, come back down to earth. That's what happened here. It was a slower game. It was somewhat expected, I think. There's a lot of quarterbacks that we've seen, including Dustin Crum, where they kind of jump out hot, and get the train rolling, and then things kind of start, slowly tapering off, over one game or the course of many games, depending on how many reps they get. Drew Brown, this was definitely the slowest I think I've seen Winnipeg's offense all year. I mean, you're used to seeing this unit, putting up 30-plus points on a regular basis, and I get that's with a different quarterback, but this was uncharacteristic for Winnipeg, although, again, it's understandable. There's certain criteria here that are a bit different. They're in a bit of a different position. But, yeah, I mean, Calgary, we just talked about it in regards to all this playoff stuff and, Ottawa and sort of drawing comparisons. They were so close. I mean, they just keep getting so close. I mean, when I saw them against BC, it wasn't close, but they've had a couple times, they took that game. They took advantage, I should say, of that game against Toronto, which is great because, my God, if they don't win that game, they're 2-8, which is at that point, I mean, that's really bad. I don't think people have really realized that yet, as much as I've tried to put a positive spotlight on Calgary and believe in them. I mean, 2-8, then you're not even thinking about playoffs at all. I mean, Saskatchewan would have already locked up the spot by that point, I think. But regardless, Calgary in this game, it was just their offense continues to baffle me. I think they have so many good receivers, and they just keep adding to that. Like, they've added Mark and Michelle, Tommy Lee Lewis in the middle of the season, and they still haven't been able to generate production. I would say Tommy Lee Lewis was the most impressive player in Calgary's offense in this game, and he had one catch. Keep in mind, that one catch went for 46 yards. But if your top player on offense has one catch, like one play, that's a really bad sign. And I think I had in my notes here too, Rene Paredes, he's a hero in Calgary. I mean, he's the one, and he still didn't have a perfect day. He went 6 of 8, but the fact that he has to attempt 8 field goals to even put them in a remote position to win, that's just not good football. That's not sustainable football. You cannot keep that going. And I know everybody in that Calgary building knows that. But it's just really frustrating because I've said so many times, like, on both sides of the ball, offense, again, receiving core, and then defense, specifically with their defensive line. I think the Stampeders have a ton of talent. That's why I was really excited to go and kind of evaluate that in person last week. But they can't get it together. And I think, now we're starting to ask more questions about Jake Mayer. For a couple weeks it was, well, this wasn't great, but it's fine. Still the start of the season. Now you're in the middle of the season and it's not fine. They are struggling to throw for 200 yards per game with Jake Mayer at quarterback. Now, keep in mind, I still like Jake Mayer. This isn't a personal, hit against anybody or anything like that. But I think from the pure football perspective, you cannot have a quarterback that, can't struggles to hit the 200-yard mark per game. You just can't have it. I mean, this was
in the CFL, especially. You can't. It's like I'm just shaking my head.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, and it's just such a shame. It makes me sad because I was so excited for Jake, and I'm sure he's probably, beating himself up about it and taking a lot of the credit. It's just sad. Like, there's just so much potential there, and I feel like if Calgary doesn't get into the playoffs, which is looking less and less likely every week, especially again with Saskatchewan pulling away, this is just it's a waste of a lot of things, And I mean, any team that doesn't make the playoffs, again, you could say this about so many teams that don't make the playoffs. There's wasted talent. There's guys that don't get an opportunity to compete for a championship, and that sucks. That's sports, that's football. Those are all general assumptions, but with this team specifically, like, I think there's so much talent on this team, and I don't want to say they haven't tapped into it because there are playmakers, and we have seen that. Calgary has been extremely competitive. They just can never get the job done. And I think when they don't get the job done, we're all quicker to point out the flaws of this team. Again, like their slower offense and the lack of, just general abilities and maybe the coaching too. I've said it on the show before. I think life's easier when you win. And you can definitely quote me on that. Life is easier when you win for everybody. From football operations that trickles down to the players. Everything is easier when you just win. And Calgary hasn't won, and they've been in so many games where they could have won, And now you're starting to see the fallout of that, where we're sitting here and we're asking all these questions about, what things might look like in the future. And again, ultimately just disappointing.
Jason, thoughts on this? I mean, I'm just shaking my head when Evan's talking, because Jake, and I love Jake, and like I said, just this stagnant offense. I've been putting up tweets, they haven't had they've had one offensive touchdown in 4 games. What do you make of this mess?
Well, I blame myself because going into the season, I had Jake Mayer ranked as my number quarter CFL now, and I was one of those people that really
Jason,
believed it.
You're having that your internet connection there kind of wonked out for a minute. Let's try one more time. You might have to log back in.
Oh, shoot. Let me try.
There you go. Let's get him back in. Evan here. I had a couple quotes. Let's do an exercise here while we wait for Jason. That was kind of every once in a while this stuff goes. Farhan just put this tweet out. Which team takes the CFL's final playoff spot? I haven't voted yet, so we're going to vote. We're going to see what the results are. So what do you think? We have 227 votes so far. Calgary, Ottawa, Hamilton. We've been talking scraping the bottom of the barrel. What do you make of this?
This one's difficult. I think it really is going to come down to the East. I mean, again, I've just said, it really comes down to Saskatchewan more than just to Calgary because none of us expected Saskatchewan to pull off the upset against BC. Now that that's happened, they're getting back to sort of winning ways. And that could all fall apart. Maybe Calgary, does make a change and becomes, a bit more drastic with their decisions given the state that they're in and the fact that they are still in the playoff race. But I don't know, just right now, like the way things are right now as we're sitting here at the end of this week, I'm going to say it's going to be an East team, and I'm going to go with Hamilton. And I might be controversial. And again, we've talked about it. I know Hamilton is,
Jason will be happy.
Yeah, they might not be. I still think Ottawa is better off long-term because I think even if Hamilton does make the playoffs, they're still going to have a lot of changes to make in the offseason and especially on the coaching side of things. And they already got, Tommy Condell, offensive coordinator, is already gone. So that's something that, they're going to have to address soon. And then probably, I don't want to talk about head coaching yet, but certainly a possibility, I think. But anyway, I think Hamilton will make the playoffs because, my belief is that Saskatchewan will pull away, which puts Calgary out. Ottawa has the potential, and I think Ottawa and Hamilton could probably finish with the same record. But I just, that it all comes down again, those 2 games that Hamilton played against Ottawa and won, that might have, in a way, I can't say saved their season because, again, if they go to the playoffs, I don't think they're going to be a winner in the playoffs. But it might have just made their season a bit more interesting and a bit more entertaining, and it might keep some more people around for longer. And I think that's an important thing to note. So I'm going to go with the Tiger Cats. That's obviously subject to change. I do see there's a scenario where Ottawa just wins more games outright than Hamilton, and I think that's a real possibility. Again, I still feel like they have the potential to do that because they've been in so many close games, and I like the culture and I like what they're building. So maybe that's the case where the tiebreaker doesn't even matter because Ottawa just turns out to be the team with more wins in the win column. But yeah, I'm gonna go with Hamilton. That's my final answer.
Jason, what do you make of this? And then we'll give you the floor to talk about the game. But we were pulling this up here. Which team makes the final playoff spot?
I'm going to regretfully say Hamilton, even though at this point, I kind of, it's sad to say as a Ticats fan, but I kind of hope they kind of miss the playoffs, so they have to make wholesale changes with this team. I feel like if they make the playoffs, they'll talk themselves into another year of the same, regime there in Hamilton. And I think that, what's really interesting is that, Ottawa, like Evan says, has to outright have more wins than Hamilton at the end of the season now because of the tiebreakers. That obviously could happen. Calgary also would have to have outright more wins because the crossover rule, there's no tiebreaker with the West Division team has to have more wins than the East Division team in order to cross over. So I think mathematically Hamilton has the better shot. But when I look around this league right now, I don't think there's many teams that the Ticats can beat. Honestly, I think other than Ottawa, which obviously they just owned Ottawa, but I think other than them, I don't think there's that many winnable games left from the schedule, but they'll probably get 2 or 3 wins here. And at the end of the day, I think Hamilton probably has the best shot of all those 3 teams.
All right, let's get your thoughts here. And internet's a little dicey. It sounds okay. We'll give it a shot here. Let's go through. You were going off on your Calgary before we had to have you log back in.
Yeah, so I was saying that I blame myself for Calgary's struggles this year because going into the season, I had Jake Maier ranked as my number 2 quarterback in the CFL. I was a full believer in him, and I think that his struggles, for the 3rd year in a row, I picked a quarterback. Last year was Vernon Adams. I picked him to win MOP. I mean, he got benched 2 games of the season. The year before was Trevor Harris. I picked him to win MOP. Obviously, the Elks had a horrible season, so I think that I blame myself for that. But I think that Calgary's just a really tough team to watch right now. Like Evan said, I think that it's just really, really painful to watch this offense. They don't take the training wheels off of this offense at all. I think that there's not taking advantage of the receiving talent, like Evan said. And I think that, it's very disappointing because they've now lost 2 games in which their defense hasn't allowed a touchdown. Going back to that game against Montreal, where the only touchdown they gave up was a pick 6. And the same thing in this one. So very disappointing for Calgary. Their record could be much better right now.
Yeah, I had a tweet here saved. I didn't realize. I think it just in the last couple weeks here, friends of the show, Milt Stiegel and Dave Sanchez, and they've started their own CFL podcast here, Wide Open With. So we have new competition here on the block, gentlemen. But they posed a question here. Dave Dickinson is a player coach, has never missed the playoffs in the CFL. Will it happen this year? Jason, we'll go to Jason just to give him because he's been logged off here, and then we'll go back to Evan. Do you see Dave missing the playoffs this year?
I mean, it's hard to say because Calgary has, had great second half to seasons in years past, most notably 2021, where they were 2-5 to begin the year, like they were this year. But I just can't see it at this point. I think they're going to miss the playoffs. It just seems like it's their turn to be a bad team. And after so many years of having success, I think it's their turn.
Evan, thoughts on this? And then I have one more funny thing on this game before we'll go to the last one.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, if my prediction stands, I mean, yeah, Calgary's not going to be in it, and I mean, it sucks to see a streak like that go, and I think it definitely marks the end of an era, and maybe with that brings some change and some new. I think again, maybe I've said it before, but Calgary's already in a bit of a transitional phase, regardless of whether they're a playoff team or not. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't see them as a playoff team right now, especially not after this weekend, and not when I saw them at all. It's been rough, it's been rough. But again, like it's hard to see any of those other teams that we mentioned as playoff teams given their struggles. And it's just a numbers game at this point, who can finish with the most wins or who has the tiebreaker. And, it gets a bit messy in that sense. And it might not mean the best playoff football, but, we know who the good teams are. And we know, who's entertaining and who will bring the best to the table. And I think that's what's most important. Ultimately, we have an expectation. So that's good.
It was funny here. I guess it was freezing cold here in Calgary in August. And so we have a new friend. He had just posted that he was going to be on Instagram now, Paula Police, not the fake Paula Police, but the real one. But I guess Farhan had like a blanket on the sidelines. I guess Farhan was, and I don't know, like kudos to the TSN production crew for finding that blanket to give to Paul. But I just thought that I don't want to play the audio. God forbid we get another copyright strike from TSN this time. But I think it was funny. Farhan, Apollo Police used to be my friend. I don't know. Jason, thoughts on this? I just thought this was tremendous.
Yeah, that's freaking hilarious. And I think the Instagram thing and how people made fake accounts of him on Instagram, that was hilarious as well. So I think he's a pretty funny guy and he's a good addition to the TSN panel for sure.
Yeah, I tweeted him that. I said, it was me. I was the one that did. But I mean, Paul, like, I think he's got follows 32 people or something on Twitter. Like, let's get the love back a little bit. You want to get people over on this. Anything else, Evan, on Winnipeg or Calgary before we get to the Thursday game?
I don't know if I have anything else about Winnipeg or Calgary, but I will say, it wouldn't be the first time I've seen Farhan wearing some interesting stuff on the sidelines. When I was in BC last year, he had the slides on, and that was a pretty iconic moment. I took a picture of that, and I hope he brings those back out again. It was a nice look. I might adopt that myself. Going back to the XFL this year, I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, you were at the Slides game. Yeah, I forgot about that. That was the infamous Slides game. Here we go. I hit the wrong button. Well, here we go. So. Edmonton, first win of the season. I will be honest, and Jason, I want to hear firsthand experience here with the weather delay and all of that. I had the game off in the corner. It really seemed like after they came back from the rain delay, there wasn't much of a game. So I have many, many notes for the first half of the game, and then it really seemed like they came back out and said, we've been sitting here for an hour and a half. Let's kind of get through this. Jason, you lived through the rainstorm. What was this like?
Yeah, so Edmonton came out fast, 21-9, a halftime lead. Trey Ford had a couple of nice touchdown passes to former Tiger Cat Stephen Dunbar in the first half. So that was nice to see from their perspective. Happy that Edmonton doesn't have to endure a winless season at this point. I don't think any CFL fan base deserves to go through that. But I just think Hamilton really wasn't prepared at all for this game, especially coming out of a bye week. That was very disappointing. And like we were talking about, winnable games going down the stretch, I think this was very much a winnable game for the Ticats, obviously, given the fact that the Elks hadn't beat anybody this season. And, they just wasted one of those opportunities. And I think, key play in this one was key 2nd and 1 play. I think they were at the Ticats 40-yard line, and just a prime opportunity to do like a trick play. It's basically just a free play because you can get that first down on the next play. But Hamilton was not prepared for a fake. And Taylor Cornelius threw it deep to defensive lineman A.C. Leonard, who was a converted wide receiver upon coming to the CFL. And, he hauled in a nice pass there and set up the second touchdown for Edmonton. And it was basically home free from there. And I think another big thing in this one was also the fact that Mark Leggio missed so many kicks. I think they totaled 10 points that he left off the board in this one. So that could have made a massive difference. But again, Hamilton just could not get in the end zone. They couldn't finish drives. And that's a theme with Taylor Powell since he's taken over as the starting quarterback here. I don't think he has a single touchdown pass in the 3 games that he started. So, I mean, you could, complete passes all you want, complete like 75% of your passes all you want. But if you're not getting in the end zone, you're not going to win many games. And that's just the facts.
Yeah, that's a Jake Mayer of it. Well, I'm 94% completion rate in the crowd. It's like, yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah, Cliffy here had the tweet. Got no Leggio. I thought that was funny. I had where was it? Marshall's. Marshall Ferguson, where I guess like wasn't even scheduled to be working that game, but just showed up, and he's had like 4 weather delays this year. Yeah, Marshall is definitely the problem. I had the other funny quote, and I'm going to. I'm going to preface if you're sensitive to language, I just thought this was funny. Speaking about the Ticats and the special teams, Jeff Reinbold said, "We quote fuck," end the quote. I thought that was a tremendously funny quote talking about the Ticats special teams. We saw a lot of this as well. Victor Cui, it's me. I'm the problem. It's me with Edmonton finally getting their win. Evan, what did you make of this? Edmonton finally getting in the W. We saw flashes with Trey Ford, but I don't think that this was surprising, but good to see them finally kind of put a complete game together, even if it was still kind of a weather delayed half.
Well, before I jump into the game too deeply, I'll shout out to Jeff Reinbold. That guy's one of my favorite coaches, not just in the CFL, but maybe ever. He's a great guy. He's worked with Sky Sports, I think, and he's done a lot of cool stuff. A great guy to talk to, interact with, whatever. Unfortunately, things maybe haven't gone his way this season, but great coach nonetheless. Great man. Getting into the game. Yeah, so Edmonton, finally got their win. We maybe had some suspicions that this was going to happen. I was in that same sort of, I'll see it when I believe it category. And well, now I believe it because it's officially on the board. But yeah, I was really, despite the weather delay and everything, it was good to see Edmonton, sort of hold things down. And I think the most important part here, and maybe this goes without saying, but Trey Ford continuing to hold down the starting job, continuing to sort of grow into that role and, take that with pride. We all agree this should have happened earlier, but that's in the past now. Nothing we can do about it. The other guy too, I mean, we've talked about Trey Ford so much. I really want to talk about Kevin Brown because this guy really deserves more credit. I think not just on the Elks team, but like in the CFL as a whole. At the running back position. I know we talked a bit about Montreal's underrated running backs like Jess Renantwi last week. But yeah, Kevin Brown, that guy can play. And I think it's gone a bit under the radar again because Edmonton struggled. No one's really watching them as much this year. But Kevin Brown will turn up, when they need him to. And he is, I think, him and like having him as the top running back and then Trey Ford is kind of a compliment, as a running quarterback. I think that I don't know. I shouldn't draw comparisons, but I kind of think about like, and I'm not saying this is really a run first team, but if you want to make a bit of a reach comparison, I think of like Lamar Jackson and Mark Ingram when they were on the same team in 2019. Now, keep in mind that team had 14 wins in the NFL. This is a 1-win CFL team. So it's a bit of a different ballpark. But what I'm getting at is, the fact that they can have a guy like that who is such a consistent runner and then have a quarterback that's also mobile, I think that will benefit them for the rest of the season if they can keep this momentum and keep winning games, whether that's away or at home. I don't know. That's just my take on it. I'm not saying Kevin Brown is the next Mark Ingram, but that's the first thing I thought of, just given this sort of situation. And there's other similar, I would say, situations playing out across the football landscape right now where you have that. But anyway, a couple other things for Edmonton. Stephen Dunbar, revenge game, obviously goes without saying. From what I remember, he might have played, I don't know if it was him, but he might have played well when Edmonton played Hamilton last time. I feel like I was hearing the name Stephen Dunbar a lot. So maybe he just kind of breaks out against his old team. I don't know, but he was very impressive in this one nonetheless. Top receiver, 2 touchdown catches. He pretty much led the offense. I'll give a special shout out to Emmanuel Arsenault too. I know a lot of attention was going around AC Leonard, coming in on the receiving play. But Manny Arsenault, became the 30th CFL receiver to surpass 9,000 career receiving yards, which I'd say is a pretty formidable accomplishment considering, he was getting old in like 2019, and then CFL stopped in 2020. 2021, he was in the IFL with the Frisco Fighters, and then signed, last year, I think, with Edmonton, 2022, because he had been in BC for many, many years before that. Really good to see him, at that age, still going, still, being productive. And, he's been, I want to say he's been banged up this season, as an older guy. I don't know. From what I understand, he hasn't exactly had a huge role. But love Manny. He's a great guy. I remember I was in BC last year, and, he was coming over and signing things for all the fans, and plenty of Arsenault 84 jerseys in there. So, good to see that. What else was I going to say? The last thing I'll say about Edmonton before we jump into the Hamilton side is Niles Morgan on defense is someone I've had an eye on all season, and he had 2 sacks, led the team in tackles in this game. Again, another player, that doesn't really get enough credit, I think, just because of the state of the team itself. They're not winning a lot of games. Not a lot of people are watching, whatever you want to put it. But Niles Morgan definitely deserves some credit for this one.
The other thing I was going to say, I had a question, my little conspiracy theory here. So I had the tweet, due to the weather delays, fans left the stadium and can come back in. First off, Jason, did you take advantage of that? No, you said I'm getting the heck out of here. How bad was first off, how bad was the weather? And then I have my conspiracy.
Oh, it was pretty bad. I mean, for the first little bit of it, because it was convenient because it happened at halftime. So, that's when they announced that there was going to be a weather delay, and the rain hadn't really started yet. It was mostly just the lightning that caused the weather delay. So we're like, let's just go home and let's see, because we live about a half an hour walk from the stadium, so we can make it back in time before the weather delay ends. And I just watched the second half at home, and that's what we did. We didn't take advantage of this offer to come back into the stadium, but at the end of the day, it was a pretty long weather delay. I think I even had like half an hour at home before it even started. So I think, that was disappointing as well for the Ticats. They had a lot of time to regroup and potentially come out with a better effort in the second half, and they just couldn't do it.
Well, here's my conspiracy. So we saw Edmonton against Winnipeg go up 22-0, and then, Trey Forward said, we didn't push the ball down the field, getting mad at Chris Jones and all of that. It really felt like I said that people came out and they're like, let's just get this game done. Like, let's kind of move on from that. Does Edmonton, Jason, does Edmonton win that game? Like if they just go in, if Hamilton just goes in for, the half, comes out and still, is still fresh, warm, isn't cold. We've been sitting in the locker room for an hour and a half. Like, I would just be curious to see what that second effort looked like, because we still, I don't feel like I've seen Edmonton put together a complete game. Like, this was a very bizarre situation for them to win that second half.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, because we'll never know how Edmonton would have came out. I think their defense really did step up in the second half when they eventually did get going. I thought that that was been a problem for them this year. They've had opportunities where they've had leads late, and they blow it. Like looking back at that game against Saskatchewan earlier this year, look back last week against Winnipeg. So I mean, they had opportunities to close games out, but they finally were able to do it. The pass rush really showed up in the key moments. They got some key sacks. So, I mean, it was good to see for Edmonton, but I think that if the weather delay didn't happen, we never know what would have happened.
I think it's interesting. My last thing from this, and then we'll do real quick. We'll talk Hamilton. We'll get out of here. I love, we have a love hate with Marshall. Marshall had his quote with Trey Ford after the game. People like to talk. I don't have to listen. Dr. Trey, he said it was then was that 100,000 times harder than Geno Smith. So they wrote me off, but I ain't right back yet. Not even in the same ballpark in terms of quotability. I don't know if you guys know Geno Smith with the Seahawks, our quarterback, and they said, a lot of people wrote me off. I ain't right back. Had a couple quotes, Rosh talking the absurd, firing Tommy Condell shows how lost the Ticats are. I have another quote here. The decline of Ticats since the 2019 Grey Cup is now complete. The team plays undisciplined, uninspiring football. It's on coaches' management. Hamilton now the worst team. Let's go to Evan, and then we'll go to Jason, and we'll get out of here because we're right hitting the hour mark.
Yeah, well, on the Hamilton side of things, in my notes, I said the team is starting to lose their identity. Not that they really had much of one before, given, things have been shaky. You're letting go of a coach midseason. But, yeah, I mean, like Arash said, you're scoring 10 points against a team, that had previously been winless. I mean, that is unacceptable. And again, while I picked Hamilton to be in the playoffs, a game like this would not signal that, and it would be completely unacceptable, for a playoff team to have this type of performance. So maybe that goes against my point from earlier. But anyways, I think that the decision to let go of Tommy Condell, I'm not going to – I don't have a say in that, so I'm not going to argue with it. Do I think it was the best decision? No. I don't think he should have been the one to go, or the fall guy, whatever you want to put him as. But it does kind of make you wonder, like maybe this will signal changes in the future. Maybe this does mean, Orlando Steinauer's done after this season. And I think that will be the big question. One of the bigger questions across the entire league, because we already know, what's going to happen, I think, with Edmonton. But with Hamilton, it's like they could go in a couple different directions, because if they do make the playoffs, like I said earlier, that could save some jobs. Maybe they put together an effort at the end of the season and they get some people back, and it's kind of like rallying the troops. And, maybe we just had some missing pieces that we couldn't fill in until now. Or maybe it really is just, things are truly falling apart, and you can't just, whatever it is, like plug squares into these circular holes or whatever. I don't know. But ultimately, just a couple notes, from the actual game. Taylor Powell and James Butler both look solid. Powell has struggled to score, but they can at least move the ball. I'd rather watch an offense that could – it's frustrating when they can't finish drives, but I'd rather watch an offense like Hamilton where they can, have some big plays and get things going, as opposed to Calgary where they just constantly stall, can't move, things like that. So I don't know. Either way, it's not good, but you get my point. And then the one player that I really wanted to mention was Tim White. And I bring that up because I haven't said a lot about Tim White this year. You have to remember, he was a CFL All-Star last season. And, this game, he kind of finally, made some progress and looked like an All-Star again. Really noticed him standing out in this one. And then, yeah, I think Jason already said it, but Mark Leggio, man, that was rough. That was really rough. And, I'm not saying that – I think he left, like 10 points on the board, so they still wouldn't have won the game if he just made all those kicks. I don't think that was the difference in this game. But it's one thing when your team is already struggling to score and, you come in and as the kicker, you're just trying to get points on the board. And when you can't do that, it's kind of like if you didn't have any hope before, then all hope is lost. And with Calgary, with Rene Paredes, he made 6 of his kicks. So while it wasn't pretty and while the offense couldn't score touchdowns, they at least had him to keep things going. And again, just get points on the board. It's not pretty. It's not exciting, but it is what it is. You're staying in the game. But with this, there was just, it's like, you're not even, you're just missing kicks. It's just one of those sloppy nights. And again, weather delay never helps. That weather delay, that I can't remember. There's hasn't been many weather delays I can remember that have been that long. And the CFL's had a lot. I didn't realize that in the summer, things get that bad. I've been up to Canada in the summer, certain parts. I haven't, been all around, obviously, but, just seems like there's been so many. The NFL has their fair share too, especially, September as things are still warm and everything like that. And then obviously at the other end in winter when things get cold, maybe snow and rain, things like that, wind. But yeah, like there's just feels like there's been a lot of weather delays, and that one for some reason just felt extra brutal.
Yeah, Marshall, blame Marshall. Tim Capper checking in here. Tim, we talked to Tim's inside sources about the Alouettes quarterback room earlier in the episode. You got to go back find it. Jason, we'll get out of here soon. Anything else from you? And then we'll try to get out because it's been long. It's been good though.
Yeah, just touching on the decision to fire Tommy Condell, I thought that it was the right decision. I think that, some of these schemes that the Ticats coaches have been running have just kind of dried up over the last couple of years. You've seen a clear decline. And I think that my only complaint with that was that it didn't go far enough. I think that all of the coaching staff basically has to go for the Ticats. I think you've seen a decline every single year. So 2019, first place, 15-3, 2021, 8-6. Second place in the East. Last year, 8-10, third place in the East. And then this year, maybe fourth place. I think that, it's pretty safe to say I don't think they're going to get to 8 wins this year. So I think that, it's just been very disappointing when you see that sharp of a decline. And I think that, like I said, I think these schemes that these coaches are running, especially defensively, I think that, offensively, they just can't score in the red zone. But defensively, they're like the worst defense in the CFL this year, which is just shocking from a Hamilton perspective because I've been so used to over my years as a fan of watching poor offenses with the Ticats, but very rarely seeing this terrible defense with the Ticats. So I think they're dead last right now in points allowed per game in the CFL, even worse than Edmonton. So, I mean, that's really what stands out for me with this team this year. I think the coaching staff, and it's worth noting that President Orlando Steinauer now makes the decisions for the personnel for this team. So he went out and made the decision to bring in all these new players this offseason. So, I mean, I think at a certain point you have to blame the coaches. And at this point, I think they deserve the brunt of the blame.
Well, we're gonna get out of here this week on the show. Got to figure out. Got the Thursday game again. Trying to do a traditional episode this week. It's just hard, kind of like getting enough pieces together. Like, do we have enough interviews to do? Otherwise, we'll go live again. I'll figure that out. But I got to send some emails out today. But yeah, this Montreal at Winnipeg, I think that's good. I think I would like to see, if Montreal can kind of make a run at it here and give Winnipeg, give a little competition there. And then we got Calgary and all of that. Hamilton and BC, we've already talked about, in Ottawa at Edmonton. Appreciate everyone. Evan, appreciate you getting back in, getting everything set up. And Jason, obviously seeing all the games. Anything else quick from you guys before we get out? All right. We'll see you guys. Check out Jason's stuff this week. I know he'll have some, previews and everything coming up. And then just stay tuned on social media and we will figure out what's going on. Thanks, guys.